Thank you. I've passed around two different versions of this. One is incredibly badly photocopied, and I've given it to my fellow Scots because you will understand the Scottish situation. And for everyone else, I've given you the good copy. I use my title Doctor because there's an Alan McManus in Glasgow who's a renowned snooker player, and I don't want for my very big mouth. But I'm not a real doctor. I'm not like Ted. North and south of the border, the difference in the political scene, I think, there are two factors, and one is that obviously Scotland is a much smaller place in terms of population. Obviously there's far fewer voters, there's far fewer people involved in politics, and certainly involved in small party politics. I thank you for your attention. Could we all pay attention, including on the couch? I'm sorry, but I'm a teacher and this is what I do. I think it's really important because we need to know who we are, and especially because we're coming up to these very important elections in England and in Holyrood. All right, I told you I've got a big mouth. Anyway, there are very few of us, and we all know each other, especially in small parties, and that means that we need to keep at least a civil relationship with each other, because people are moving parties, because there are fallouts, there are, personality things, and as Cass said, we need to rise above that. We need to maintain a working relationship with each other, and especially now, Ken and I I'm always finding unionists and saying, hey, phone Ken and stand for ADF. He's always finding nationalists and saying, phone sovereignty, And that's the other thing about Scotland, is that the unionist and nationalist divide is very deep and very bitter. My mum's English, so I know, and I was chairman of Freedom Alliance, and one of the reasons why I moved to sovereignty is because coming up to the Holyrood elections, I felt it was confusing to voters for me standing in Scotland and saying, I am a Scottish nationalist, but my party is neutral on Scottish independence, therefore decentralisation of power, but they're neutral, and voters were trying to get their heads around that, and that was confusing. Now, our friends, the English Democrats, of course, nationalism is a burning issue for them, but for most people in England, if you said, are you a nationalist or are you a unionist, you would find it difficult to comprehend that question. But in Scotland, unionists will normally only vote for a unionist, nationalists only for a nationalist. The other dimension is the woke and the awake. Now, I don't need to explain those terms to anyone in this room, and I know we don't have a lot of time. But there's also another dimension, and that is those, as I've said, like Freedom Alliance, who are obviously awake, who are neutral in terms of constitutional arrangements. And in Scotland, there's really only two parties. And when I talk about these parties, these are not necessarily all registered in Scotland, but they are operating in Scotland. I understand that there's considerable expertise in this room, and some of these you may put question marks against and say, Alan, I think you've got that bit wrong, okay? And, I probably have. The Scottish Family Party are a socially conservative party, and they really are interested in one thing, and that is protecting and promoting the welfare of heterosexual married couples and their children. And that is their big thing. Of course, nowadays, that attracts negative censure, and people find them homophobic and transphobic and all the rest of it. But to give them their due, that is what they say. Personally, and I think this is because I'm coming to it from a civil liberties point of view, I find that difficult sometimes, because in the social media scene, they're not talking about civil liberties, so they're not making a difference between, for example, drag queens in primary schools and some guy in Uganda who is just trying to get through the day without being killed or sent to prison for 14 years. And I don't think that anyone, I could be wrong, but I don't think that anyone in this room wants to go back to criminalising homosexuality and sending people to prison or killing them. But that is the situation in some African countries, and I think that we need to make a distinction, because that ever-growing acronym is not helpful at all. So that's them. The Workers' Party, run by George Galloway, is very anomalous because he was a unionist. clearly, now claims to be a Scottish nationalist, but in fact he is.
Changes every week.
Right. He's an international socialist. His running mate is a white woman who is English, who is standing in Glasgow, wears the hijab. She's a convert to Islam. They have a big Muslim backing in that party. And she is standing in a constituency, and in doing so, she is stepping on the toes of the leader of the Independence for Scotland party, which, if you look at this little scheme, these are the half-awake nationalist parties, right? And they are ALPA, or ALBA, you can say either, and famously formerly led by Alex Salmon, who are a kind of mini SNP. They're fairly woke. All of these parties would say that they're sex realist or gender critical, meaning that they accept there's male and there's female and that's it. Some of them would reinforce those traditional roles, like the Scots Family Parties. Other ones would say if a wee girl wants to play football, she's still a wee girl. You know, she's not a wee boy. So we don't need to, reinforce those roles, but there are only two sexes. So that's the difference between sex realist and gender critical. You could say, I for I is independence for independence, and it's a network of independence. Those two groups, together with Sovereignty, my party, now make up a political grouping called Liberate Scotland. I'll come back to that. Together with Sovereignty, in the awake nationalists are the Scots Libertarians, who are like Libertarians south of the border in that they are basically anarcho-capitalists. I find them very refreshing. I don't agree with them on everything, but they have got a bit of one-size-fits-all to their economics. Recently there has been an interesting dialogue between one of our number, Laurie Moffat, who knows all about Georgism, which some of you may know about. Economics is absolutely not my strong point. It's about land tax, and the theory is that land value is what the community earns, because you've got two houses in two different places. They are the same house. This is a posh area and the house price soars. This is a deprived area and the house price goes down. The person who owns the house has done nothing to gain that value. Who has done the work? The community. The idea of the land value tax is that that is the only ethical tax, because that work belongs to the community. As I say, it's not my forte, but it's an interesting discussion that we're having with the Libertarians, because to them tax is a terrible thing. And yes, but the land value tax is the least bad of the taxes. So, because you will know that it is difficult to take libertarianism into the community, to the voters, and basically say you're on your own, you know. But this is an interesting midway point. To go back to Liberate Scotland, and this is really what I want to explain to you. I'm really grateful to Rob, who talked about the list system, which means that it makes it easier for me to do this now. When we vote for Holyrood, this is what we do. We get two ballot papers. Ballot paper 1 is the constituency. It's first past the post. Holyrood constituencies, Scottish Parliament constituencies, are very similar to Westminster. Sometimes they have the same name or similar, sometimes the same boundaries or similar. You know how to do that one. So, for example, let's make a fictitious thing. If Mark Turnbull is standing in Paisley South for Freedom Alliance, then if I'm there, I can vote, for Mark Turnbull. If he gets first past the post, he gets in. Freedom Alliance gets an MSP in Holyrood, right? We understand that. Similarly, if Ken Thompson is standing in Paisley North, if I'm there, I can vote for him. ADF might get their first MSP in Holyrood. But in that region of west of Scotland, which is a big region, so you can, in terms of England, you can think about maybe northwest of England, right, and all the different constituencies in there. So in west of Scotland, which includes these two constituencies and many more, I get a second ballot paper, and this, as Rob has explained, is the regional list. What I do as a voter is I rank the parties, not the candidates. So I might, for example, write ADF one. Because what Freedom Alliance and ADF might have done, and this of course is up to yourselves, is Mark might have decided to stand in his constituency for Freedom Alliance and for ADF in the same way that people will stand for the Labour and cooperative parties. But for the list, he may decide to stand for ADF. Now, why would he do that strategically? Because it means that then voters are voting for one awake list. And we don't have a list for ADF, a list for Freedom Alliance, a list for Heritage, a list for, whoever else is standing there. So it doesn't split up the vote. Now, the list is proportional representation, so the voter ranks the parties. If Ken's number one, for example, and he gets 5% of the vote, gentlemen, I'm going to tell you off as I told off the ladies, I'm very fair. If he gets 5% of the vote, then he gets in, right? If he gets in and they get more votes, then Mark gets in too. Alright, so that's something for the parties to think about. Okay, so who else? Just a word on the main parties. Labour. There is no red surge happening in Scotland, and there has not been for the past 2 years. And if you see the SNP has not been winning by-elections, you're absolutely right. And Labour has been winning by-elections. Are they more popular? No. It's because the decrease in SNP is so sharp. The decrease in Labour is not so sharp, but they're going down. But SNP have gone down more, so Labour breaks the surface and they get in. That's what's happening. Lib Dems apparently are doing quite well in some rural constituencies. Why? It's not because people are voting for Lib Dem policies, because as we all know, they don't have any. They just go with the wind. What people are doing is voting for dynasties of members of a family who are local and are considered a good pair of hands and have got this knowledge and expertise that they pass down through the generations. And that's why, as we all know, flying people into rural constituencies is just not a good idea, because it doesn't work. The Tories sometimes are doing well in rural constituencies as well for those reasons. But basically all the big parties are doing badly in Scotland, and Reform is rising. Whether they're going to break through in Scotland, I don't know. The other news, very quickly, I'm going to share with you from Scotland, is the Greens. The Scottish Greens, who are a different party, right? None of those other big parties are separate parties, right? Scottish Labour is just a description, Scottish Tories, Scottish Lib Dems, they're just descriptions. Scottish Greens are a Scottish registered party. Recently, their eco-socialist wing has left them and gone to your party. Why? Because the Scottish Greens are too middle class. Led by one person, since this is being recorded, called Ellie Gomersall, who didn't used to have that name and didn't used to present as that gender. Right? And this person is an extremely middle class person, and your party, you may know, is being run by millionaires. Now I think we should have a whip round, because one of the millionaires only has, poor lassie, only has £1.5 million of a net worth, right? All the rest has far more. And yet the Greens are calling, the ex-Greens are calling the Green Party middle class. What I'm trying to say is that the Green Party is being impoverished by its radical base, but they are not learning. They are still going broke for woke, and so are the SNP. So what we've got in Scotland is that we have this overlap of Belmont parties and Belmont adjacent parties, where we don't particularly care whether we are independent or whether we're part of the union. We have our own views and we have our own preferences, and yes, we are working with that. But the main thing that we want is truth and freedom for everyone. But being nationalist or being unionist means that we've got a platform. So I have stood shoulder to shoulder with Alistair McConaughey, who is Scotland's biggest unionist. I have stood there in George Square in Glasgow, and together with Ken and other people and Ryan, and said to people, I am Roman Catholic because religion is all over this divide in Scotland, and I am a Scottish nationalist, and I am here for freedom of speech, and I am naming what I am because other people like me can come and get this warm welcome. So what I'm saying is that we can cross these divides, but we can also use these tribes, these clans, as they would be in Scotland, in order to speak to people who are not awake, because they will listen. Because unfortunately, these people here, in the conglomerate of Liberate Scotland, in the network of independents, Eye for Eye, and in the political party ISP, are kind of soft woke. You know, they're soft on migrants because they're be kind, and they're soft on man-made climate change because, you know, they just don't know the truth. But they are listening. They're listening to us, and one of the reasons why they're listening to us is because we are doing what we're all doing here. We're making electoral pacts and we're being gracious to them. And that's important. You know, politeness, so old-fashioned, and it's really, really important. And on that note, I don't want to be rude any longer, because I am naturally rude, as you've seen. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you for your attention. Question, yes.
So, because you've got multiple parties, and this would apply for the Liberate one as well, the coordination has to be on point, because and you have to obtain, for example, signatories to put forward an MP candidate. So you would have to constituency and list in Scotland, for example, and likewise organise all of the members within the party for a specific location. So it might be
No, we've done, what I've done is I've given you a very simplified version of our electoral strategy, because in fact what we're doing in the 8 regions of Scotland, sovereignty are basically controlling the Highlands and the North East, like Aberdeen, all that kind of area, and ADF are basically controlling west of Scotland. So I live in west of Scotland, but I'm not standing there. I've moved over a constituency because of this pact. Now, Ken and I have been having an informal conversation, because I'm not in the Committee of Sovereignty, to say, would we consider perhaps standing in each other's regions, but not, I would say, not in each other's constituencies, because that might give us a bit more scope, and that's an ongoing discussion. But we do need to, we're 6 months away, we need to decide, because I've already got printed, I'm already in social media, people are already doing their campaigns. So we've got about another month maybe to absolutely decide who's standing where, and then we just have to go for it.
But you know, what was mean was the actual members of your political party, so the rank and file, who will need to go out and leaflet if you've got enough money to leaflet for that collectively, to organise that.
There was a by-election recently in Fife, and all of these parties, all of these, you know, half-awake parties, they know that I say this about behind the fact, they came and helped our candidate leaflet in Fife. So this kind of thing is already happening. So sovereignty is an interesting intersection of here's sovereignty, here's Belmont, here's Liberate Scotland. There's a bit of a tension there, but it means that there's lots of people that we can speak to. So I've been encouraging ADF to do something similar, and I think that an ADF list would be a good idea. It's obviously not up to me, but it's a suggestion. Okay. Any other questions?
You've been talking about property tax, and I'll come in, so I missed. What were you talking about there? Land tax?
Land tax, yes.
Could you explain a little bit about that in a nutshell?
Well, it's just, so the idea basically is that, you know, tax is theft. You know, it's like you work, I'm the government, I come along, I take your money, and I give you it back in dribs and drabs, you know, and then say you should be grateful for it. And if I just left you alone, then you would have enough money to sort your own life out. And that's what the libertarians say. The problem with that is that what if you know, you're a young family, you have a disabled child who's going to need an awful lot of help, who hasn't built up all the credits that your parents will have built up all their working lives. What do we do about that? We do need some kind of public money, you know. And the libertarians would say, well, you just do it with philanthropy. You know, philanthropy with charity.
Or insurance, private insurance.
Right, okay, so there's lots of different ways. I mean, another idea that I personally have is that if we made the councillors and the MPs and the MSPs trustees of public money and put on them the legal duties of trustees, because they have to manage money well, speaking as a law student, I think that might be interesting, because what happens, we elect these people and they've got loads of money and they just start chucking it about. And who did they chuck it to? Their friends, as we know. So it's an ongoing discussion about land tax, about how that works. Georgism, look up Georgism. I don't know much about it, but it's interesting.
No, but that's not, I mean, you could have the value of the property over here was more than one over there.
Yes.
That's the basis of George's.
It's because where it sits on, where it sits,
but it doesn't do the asset rich but cash poor. What are you going to do about
yes. Okay. It's not my forte. I know what I'm good at. I know. But I'm going to look up. Any other questions?
No, I don't do it.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.